Right, so this is a video on the Peerflekta V, I think it's called, and this is a camera. I haven't shot with it in at least 20 years, but I think I can probably explain how to do it. I might have a couple questions, and maybe they can go to the community. I'm making this for somebody on Reddit, and so basically the camera has two different lenses. There's a taking lens and there's a shooting lens, and so we're going to check a few things about the shooting lens just to make sure that it's actually hopefully functioning correctly, that kind of thing. You'll notice mine does have a bit of an imperfection here. Somebody modified it or did something, probably to put in a remote shutter or something like that, trigger, but it still works properly. There weren't any light leaks when I used it. So basically though, we're going to go over a bunch of different things here, and so before we get into film and all that kind of stuff, we first have to kind of make sure that to the best of our ability that the shutter is working properly and that kind of thing. So your shutter is in the taking lens down here, and the shutter speeds are all around the outside here. And a lot of this information is going to seem overwhelming, but I'll go over how to measure light with your cell phone so that you'll actually be able to just plug in those numbers. So it'll be really easy. But basically you should see here the letter B on here. You can twist this around. At the top here there's a little indicator that's showing that whatever number is at the top is where it's set. Bulb means that if you hold down the shutter release, then the shutter is going to stay open indefinitely. So we're not really going to use that. We're going to use 1 through 300 here. So the lower the number, the longer the shutter is going to remain open. So basically when we press the shutter release, the shutter is going to open up. It's going to wait for a certain amount of time, and I'm not that great with photography, so some of the terminology isn't great for me. I don't know if it's 1/1000th of a second or something like that versus 3 whatever. Anyways, doesn't matter. Point is that when it's a low number, the shutter is going to stay open longer. So we actually have to test this and make sure that the shutter speed is, at least to our ears, sounding pretty okay. So right here is your shutter cock. You're going to pull that down. This has a mechanism on it, so it'll only release the shutter when the film has been moved forward. So we don't have the film in yet, but we're going to spin that a couple of times because it's going to release the shutter on this, basically. So we've cocked our shutter down here, and all we're going to do is come up here. We have it set to 1 up here, and so what we want to listen for is kind of a whizzing sound that's going to last longer when it's on 1 than when it's on 300, because that 1 means that we want the shutter to stay open longer to let more light in. So let's just listen to it. So you hear that zzz, right? It stayed open for quite a while. If we go up to 300 and we do the same thing, we spin the knob a couple of times, cock the shutter, and release, you're just going to hear click. There's no whiz there, right? Because the shutter's opening and closing so quickly that it doesn't have that little mechanism that's holding it open. And if we go in between somewhere, let's say we'll put it on like 25 here, cock the shutter, spin it a couple of times, release it. Oh, sorry, I'm going to do that again. 1, 2. Try not to get your finger in the way if you're taking pictures there. Hopefully what you're going to hear, I didn't hear much of a sound there. I'm going to put it on 10 and just hear. So again, the community can maybe correct me if I'm missing something here. There, you hear that little zzz, just a short little mechanical sound that's holding that shutter open. And you'll actually see it too. If you open up, you go inside, and you put this on to 1, cock the shutter, make sure that's spun a couple of times, you'll actually see it open for a second inside. So you'll actually see the taking lens open for a second. Now, so that tells me that at least it's trying to set appropriate shutter speeds there. If it was broken, it's hard to say exactly what you hear. Maybe it wouldn't make a sound, or on the longest settings it probably wouldn't whir. You'll probably know there'll be something that isn't quite right. So what else is on here? We've also got your aperture control. And so we can also test the aperture control. Now, it's a little finicky thing that's hard to see right here. Let me see if I can zoom in closer here. Sorry, I'm not a videographer at all. This is new to me. So you see that little thing there? If you, sorry, down here. If you zip that up and down, you're going to go between aperture setting of, it looks like 16 all the way down to 3.5. So 3.5 means that when the shutter releases, the aperture is going to open up really wide, and it's going to let a lot of light in. So the lower the number, the wider the aperture. And again, you don't need to know all of this right away. Your light meter is going to actually give you these numbers to start with. So don't get overwhelmed by them. Just do the test and make sure that it's okay. So at 3.5, if we do that, cock the shutter, we open up and look inside, when we release, it should open really wide. You should see the whole taking lens open as wide as possible. Whereas if we go down here again, there's that little knob again that I'm talking about, we push it all the way up. The numbers I'm looking at are like right here. You probably can't see them too well. It says 16, all the way up to 16. And we do the same thing. We cock the shutter a couple of times like that. We cock it and take a look inside, and you should see it shouldn't open as much. See how it didn't open as wide. Sorry, that might have been a little blurry, but you could see with your eye in real life there that it didn't open as wide. So that's exactly what we want to see. There's a little latch where you can kind of click it shut there. And so this one shot okay the last time, but I didn't have a light meter, and so I was using the Sunny 16th rule or whatever. I honestly wouldn't recommend it. I recommend metering properly, you know, right from the get-go, because we have our cell phones now that can do that for us, and I'll teach you how to do that. So again, I'm no expert, you know, this is, I'm really open to critique. I'd love to learn more if there's anybody who wants to you know, tell me something new here too. This big dial on the side here, that is your focus. So you'll see the lens is moving in and out. Both the viewing lens and the taking lens both move in and out when you move that. One other thing that's on here is, I'm going to spin this just to get it ready to cock the shutter, is this little red dial here, right here. If you pull that down, that's your timer. You can hear it. That definitely makes another whir sound. And when I hold this down, you'll hear it whir away before it even tries to release the shutter. So that's another mechanical sound that's pretty similar. And when it gets to the bottom, because I cocked the shutter, it'll flip up. It would take the picture at that point. So that's just your timer if you want to run around, you know, or if you want to take your hands off the camera so you don't shake it, right? Because with this type of camera, you're going to want a lot of stability. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So basically, we can open up the top. There's a little thing here, a little switch. We just pull it to the side. I sometimes have to kind of tap that to open it up. And that's sort of a guard just for you know, keeping the light out so you can get the brightest sort of image in the viewfinder. And so basically we're going to look down in there and we're going to compose our shot. It'll be the reverse of what you expect it to be. And then we're going to use our little focus knob in and out to get the appropriate focus. But there's a little trick here in there. There's a little magnifying glass. And if you hold that right up to your eye, you'll be able to focus a little sharper, hopefully, provided it's clean enough and that kind of thing. It is best to be in good lighting when you practice this at first. So basically, there is one other little trick, and this is a little more, it's called a sports finder, and to be honest, I wouldn't recommend using it right away, but just so you know that it's there, there's a way that you can push this down, and you'll actually look right through this hole here. You look through that hole, and out this frame. Oh, sorry about that. And out the frame. And basically what it's going to do, mine isn't staying open too well, what it's going to do is you can kind of scan as you're going you know, say following a runner or a car or something like that, and click down. But I'm going to recommend with this camera that you're really, really careful about stability, so you don't really want to be moving it, at least when you're getting started with it. So that's just an interesting little feature to know about. You pull that back, and it releases it. And I'll close that down for now. So basically, those are the starting features for the camera. And from here, we can kind of talk about film and that kind of thing. I do have one question about loading it, excuse me, because it has been so long. But I've got a few film stocks here that I can show you. So this is Ilford HP5, and it's a black and white film stock. Pretty inexpensive. I think I got this for $7.99 Canadian, which I'm not sure what that is in the States exactly, but that's cheap. Really, honestly, it's not expensive at all. I picked it up at what we call Henry's, which I think might be Canadian. And so, you know, but you can probably get it in a large city or online or something like that, you know, from different suppliers. So that's a black and white film. Portra 400, which is a Kodak film, and that's has a beautiful sort of tone to it. I can show you a picture that I took with that sort of has a warm kind of tone to the leaves and that kind of thing to it. Beautiful. It's for portrait photography primarily, but you can use it for just about anything. It is a little bit more expensive probably, but and this is just another Portra. So I recommend probably just starting out with 400 ISO film because that's going to give you a little bit of play when it comes to stability, right? So being stable with photography, I don't know how much you know about other types of photography, so I might be already telling you something you know here, but if you move the camera when the shutter is open, it's going to record almost like a video onto a still frame, right? Because when the shutter's open, the image is moving back and forth across the film, right? Because the shutter's open so long, it just continuously records whatever it's seeing. So we can talk about some strategies around that, and with this type of camera, as I say, we want to keep it really stable, and there's some tricks that you can do with settings to make it a little bit more likely that you're going to get a nice stable shot, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So basically with the film, this is the part where I do have some questions because it's been a long time, and I don't remember online where I found like 20 years ago how to do this, to be honest. I think I talked to people on forums just like you have. So basically we come down here, we've got our little opening mechanism there. We open the camera up, and there's a tricky little thing on the bottom here. We have to pull that down. And so with 120 format film, sorry, I think I forgot to mention that, this is 120 format, 400 ISO, right? So that's the film speed. How fast the light burns in is 400 ISO, and 120 is the size of the film. So you'll notice that it's a nice wide film. That's 35 millimeters, only about that wide, right? So you get a lot of resolution on this film, or at least you could call it resolution as a concept. And so basically what our goal is here, and as I say, there's a question I have, but what we want to do is, this is the old spool from the film. The film started here, and you always move the spool each time. You actually reuse the one. Like this has a spool in it. You'll see this one has a new spool in it, a little plastic one, just like this. So this is actually the old exhausted roll that I've used up. And so what we need to do first is figure out how to get this out. So I guess it feels like there's a little way it gives way right here. Sorry, that's really hard to show. Kind of gives away. There's like a little thing that pulls out. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it slides basically. So you can pull out the exhausted film spindle. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually move that spindle up into the top here, right up in here. So I know this might seem a little bit overwhelming, but honestly, if you stick with it, it will work, and you know, you will figure it out. Once you get the hang of it, it's really not that bad. So what we're going to do is pull this. You know what? This is the knob we were spinning before. We're going to pull that out, which makes room for the spindle in there, and figure out how to set it down inside. And it is finicky, for sure. Yeah, this is really going to be difficult. Yeah, so this is what I was saying, is that I have a couple of questions. And this is one of them. Oh, I see. Okay, so this actually pulls up. That's the solution. There's a little thing here that pulls up. And hopefully, if I'm right, now I can get one end in there. It's honestly very frustrating. Okay, there, it goes up even further. So it goes right up to 90 degrees. Okay, and then as you bring it down, you just spin that in, I guess. There, okay. Now, it's kind of hard to see. Sorry for the lack of light here. But you'll be able to see that spinning in there now. Okay, so down here, we open that up. And this, I can't actually use this roll because this is actually a roll that's been taken already. But just to kind of show you what you do, you're going to plug that in here until it clicks. And then you're going to pull off the roll, basically. So what you want is the film side, so the side without any labels or anything like that on it. The film back is going to be showing as you pull it out. So I'm just going to put it in just so I can show you. You'll actually have it just like this, except you want to make sure, see, I have it backwards technically. You'll want to make sure it's this way so that that flap will come out over top, right? So you're going to actually put that in there. You're going to unfurl the flap, and you're going to pull it up over here so that the film part is facing the inside where the taking lens is, right, from the inside. So the black part, the film, is going to go up over here and then in to here. And in there, the spindle has sort of a slot in it. So you're going to take, the film will have kind of like this beveled end to it, and you're going to stick that right into the slot there and turn it a couple of times. Now, the part that I don't know, and if I remember correctly, what someone told me, is that you're going to close all this up once you're done, and you have it sort of, actually, sorry, before you close it, you're going to put the end in there. You're going to turn it a couple of times just to get it started, just until you're confident that it's really caught the film, right? But there's still a lot of space for you to turn, so I believe, and this is what we have to check, is that when you close this up like that, so it's all locked shut now, I believe that the way you find out where your first roll is you look in this little spot here, you click that up, and you'll be able to actually see a number through there. So you're going to turn it like this, and keep turning it, and you'll see things go past the little window likely, until eventually you'll see a 1, and you'll know that you're on the first shot. Then you'll close that up, and you're ready to go. So remember, because you don't cock it, it's not, you won't accidentally actuate the shutter or anything like that, right? So it can just sit like that until you're ready to take your shot. So now you're actually loaded, and you can actually do the process. So you're going to take your measurements that we'll talk about. You're going to set them in here, your shutter speed on the top here, and your aperture on the bottom. You're going to focus, cock the shutter, and then it'll already have been turned, right? Because this will be turned already, so we don't want to touch that because it's all ready to go. It's on the first shot. We're just going to aim at what we want, stabilize properly, and then click. So that'll be your first shot. Now, the other thing that you're going to have to find out, we'll try to look around a little bit, is that this, I think what you do is you have to actually open the little window and then click it forward until you see 2, right? And I believe you're going to get 12 shots out of this because it's a square format. So it is a little expensive, but the shots, they're beautiful, right? So it's worth it to put them on, this larger format of film. And the resolution will be gorgeous. The sort of aspect of the shot will look really nice. So I found that what came out was pretty clean on this too, and hopefully your lens is in good condition. So, all right, so outside of that, that's basically how you're going to shoot. But then on your smartphone, you're going to go and grab a program called Light Meter out of the App Store. So this is an Android phone. And basically what this does is it allows you to measure how much light is needed. So you're going to go in here and you're going to say, okay, well, I've got 400 ISO film, so I'll set the little slider to 400 ISO over here just by pulling it down. You'll figure this out. I mean, it's very self-explanatory. So 400 ISO means how long or how quickly the light burns into the film. And then what you're going to do is determine a couple of things. You want to know how much depth of field you want. And so if you're taking a picture and you want there to be a blurry background and you'd like to be able to take a shot in lower light, these are concepts you're going to have to look into a little bit yourself. But let's say you wanted to have a really wide open aperture, like we talked about down here, to let a lot of light in. So you're going to move your aperture down here somewhere. And let's say an aperture of 3.5 means that your background is going to be really blurry, but you're going to have tons of light to work with. So you might shoot that way if you were just walking around with this on a strap. You wanted to take a picture of a person on a street or something like that just by holding it without putting it on a tripod. So let's say we decided we don't mind having a low depth of field, so the background will be kind of blurry, the subject will be sharp. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that on 3.5, and we're going to flip here so that we are set. You'll be able to see a little image in the middle. There's a little, this is reflected light versus, I forget the other one, but basically we want, we're going to try reflected light first here and say, see how there's an image in the middle? If we hit measure, so we've decided we want to use an f-stop of 2.8. At the top there, you'll see 2.8, and it's going to tell us the shutter speed to use at 2.8. So between about 4 and 8. I know this probably seems really overwhelming. Stick with it, trust me. It's dead simple once you actually get it. Like, you'll be surprised how easy it is. And so, yeah, so 1.4 would be between 30 and 15. 2.8 is the lowest we have, actually. Sorry. So what do we have? Oh no, sorry, 3.5. So we're actually right about here. We have 3.5 on this camera. So we're going to go just a little under 4. The shutter speed is going to be between about 8 and 4 there. So we go on here, and there are numbers right on the top. That's our shutter speed. So between 5 and 10, you're going to get an okay exposure there if you're set at 3.5 aperture, right? So all we're going to do is stabilize it, make sure that our film has been advanced to the next frame that we want to shoot on, clock our shutter, make sure we're all focused first, right, with a viewfinder, and then we're just going to release, and that'll actually capture the image on there. So basically, just to clarify a little bit about go online and look up the exposure triangle, and that will help a lot in understanding basically what the different parameters of photography are, what your f-stops do, how they're related to your shutter speed, and how they're related to your film speed as well, because those three different parameters are basically the fundamentals of photography, and they're all about trading off stability of the camera, how much you can move it around, with how much depth of field you have in your image. So like this would have a really low depth of field because you can see everything's blurry in the background, whereas this picture here has a higher depth of field because you can see detail way in the back there, right? So this was probably shot with an f-stop that was like, f16 or something like that, right? Which means that there was just a little pinhole when the aperture opened. It was very small, but I had lots of light, so I could get away with that. The shutter speed could be low in that case. It didn't have to keep the shutter open as long because there was lots of light outside. So it's all about kind of trading off these parameters, but that does take a little bit of time and practice to kind of get used to. Whereas in the forest here, I had lower light, and so I actually decided to use an f-stop probably right at the bottom, something like 3.5 or lower. It was a different camera that took this picture, but basically because I wanted that aperture to open really wide. Remember, a lower number on the aperture means it's opening wider, because I want lots of light to go in there. Because if I was sitting there in the forest and I was wobbling back and forth as my shutter and aperture were open, then I would have just gotten a blur on my film, right? So because it was darker, that meant that I had to open the aperture up wider and use a faster shutter speed. So that's the concept there, is that the shutter doesn't have to be open as long if we have a wide aperture, basically. One is how wide, you know, the opening here is getting. The other one is how long it stays open. So basically though, when you're learning, I really recommend just putting it on a tripod. Because you can't go wrong if you're on a tripod, and if you're really careful and you really delicately touch it, you're not going to cause too much shake or jitter. Or you can stabilize it, put it on the ground, put it on a ledge, hold it up against a phone pole, that kind of thing. And then that way you can actually set pretty much anything you want. You could go all the way up to, if you're on a tripod, you could go all the way up to f15, where you have a tiny little hole opening. You could have a shutter speed that doesn't open very long, like 300, and you could be in low light, and it doesn't matter because the camera's not moving. It's not going to record that shake. So I think those were the main things. You know, I highly recommend getting the app because you'll be able to you know, get those measurements, and you won't really have to think about it. The only thing that you need to think about is if you go high numbers on your f-stops, make sure that you're using stability on the camera. If there's low light at all, even if the light's pretty good, I'd still use stability. Use a tripod, hold it up against something. If it's super bright out, you can probably get away with a little bit more, but it depends. So those are the main things. I hope it's somewhat helpful, and I hope it's not way too overwhelming. I know it's a lot of information, but you know, let me know if there's anything else I can help you out with, and I'll try to look into if there's any more tips there as well. Thanks for watching.